Our story number 70, the story of Esther, is very unique. It comes, of course, from the book of Esther. But one of the things that makes this book so unique is that God is never mentioned directly. His name is never used in the book. But the story of Esther tells about some of the Jews that were now captives in Babylon, and it tells about what almost happened to them. And had Haman been successful in his plan, the Jews would have been completely destroyed, and the promises that God had made would have been left in ruins. But this unique story about Esther and her uncle Mordecai really demonstrate how, even though it's not obvious, God is at work at all times, and God is preserving and taking care of his people, even in ways that ordinarily might go largely unnoticed. And so, the story of Esther. About 70 years after Zerubbabel had led a group of exiles back to Jerusalem, in the 3rd year of his reign, Ahasuerus, who from his palace in Susa reigned over lands from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, decided to host a festival for all his princes and servants. The powerful people of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces came. He showed them the riches of his glorious kingdom for 180 days. At the end of the festival, the king held a banquet at the citadel for those who were present in Susa, both great and small. It lasted 7 days and was held in the enclosed garden of the king's palace. White, green, and blue hangings decorated the gardens. Benches were decorated with gold and silver, and walkways had mosaics made of red, blue, white, and black marble. Plenty of wine was drunk from vessels of gold. Vashti, the queen, hosted a feast for the women in the royal palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the last day of the banquet, when the king was a little tipsy from the wine, he commanded his 7 servants to bring Vashti, the queen, to him, wearing the royal crown, so he could show everyone how beautiful she was. When the queen refused to come, the king became very angry and said to his advisers, "What shall we do to the queen, since she has not obeyed the king?" Then Memucan, one of the advisers, answered, "Vashti has not only done wrong to the king, but she has also wronged all the princes and all the people who live in the provinces of the king. Soon all the women will hear about this, and they will despise their husbands." When Vashti refused to come, when a second command was given, Ahasuerus commanded that Vashti could no longer come before the king. The princes advised him to give her royal estate to someone else who was better than she. So the king's decree was published in all the languages of the empire. In it he commanded that all the wives honor their husbands. When King Ahasuerus' anger died down, his servants advised him to have his officers bring all the beautiful young women of the kingdom to Susa, and let him choose the one who pleased him most to be queen in place of Vashti. The idea pleased him, so that is what he did. Now, right in the palace at Susa lived a certain Jew named Mordecai, a Benjamite, who had been brought from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar during the exile. Mordecai had cared for his cousin Hadassah, who was called Esther, treating her as his own daughter because her father and mother had died. She was very beautiful. When the king's decree was announced, many young women were brought to the palace. Among them was Esther. She immediately pleased the king, and he gave her 7 young women to be her servants. Esther had not told anyone about her family background, because Mordecai had told her not to do so. Every day Mordecai walked near the courtyard of the women's house so he could find out how Esther was doing and what might happen to her. After a year of purification ceremonies, when it came Esther's turn to meet the king, He loved her more than any of the other women, and he made her queen instead. She did everything that Mordecai told her, as she had done when she was growing up. She still did not reveal her family background to anyone. About the same time, two of the king's doorkeepers became angry with the king. While Mordecai was sitting by the gate, he overheard them making plans to kill the king. Mordecai told Esther about their plans, and Esther told the king what Mordecai had told her. When the king had the matter investigated, and he found out that Mordecai was telling the truth, the men were hanged, and the incident was recorded in the king's records. After this happened, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman to rule over all the princes and the king's servants. Everyone bowed down to Haman, as the king had commanded, but Mordecai did not bow down or show reverence for him. When the king's servants at the gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" he again refused to obey. He told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or give him reverence, he became angry. From then on, Haman planned to destroy all the Jews in Ahasuerus' kingdom, especially Mordecai's relatives. In the month of Nisan, Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain group of people scattered in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from everyone else's, and who don't obey the king's law. It isn't good for the king to tolerate them any longer. If it pleases you, command that they may be destroyed. I will put money in the treasury to pay those who take care of the business." Then the king took the ring from his finger and gave it to Haman. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman. "Do what you think is right." Soon Haman had the commands written and posted in every part of the kingdom. They commanded everyone to destroy and kill all the Jews, young and old, little children and women, on the 13th day of the month of Adar. The property of the Jews could be taken by those who followed the command. The command was also posted in Susa, but the city was perplexed. When Mordecai learned about everything that was done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth with ashes, and went into the city to the king's gate, where he wailed loudly and bitterly. No one could enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province there was great mourning among the Jews. The stage is set. Mordecai had been of service to the king through Esther, and now Haman is seeking to destroy Mordecai and all the Jews. And Haman is a very powerful, we might say he was the king's right-hand man. The king gave him his own ring with which to sign and seal proclamations and commands concerning what was to happen with the Jews. And so the word goes out that at some point in the future, and the day is actually given here, that anyone could just take it upon themselves to kill the Jews and then keep their possessions and whatever else might be left behind. When Esther's maid told her what Mordecai was doing, she was so upset that she sent clothes to him, but he refused them. Then she sent Hathach, one of the king's servants, who had been assigned to attend her, to talk with Mordecai to find out why he was wailing at the gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened and gave him a copy of Haman's commands to give to Esther. He told Hathach to tell Esther to go to the king and plead for her people. When Hathach told Esther what Mordecai had said, she told Hathach to remind him that it was the king's law that anyone who approached him in the inner court could be put to death unless the king pardoned him. "I haven't been called to appear before the king for a month," she told him. "Tell her this," Mordecai commanded Hathach. Don't think that since you live in the king's house you will escape. If you hold your peace now, deliverance for the Jews will come from someone else, but you and your family will be destroyed. Who knows? You may have come to your position for such a time as this." And the Christian church has has always taken this to be, in fact, kind of pointing to God at work behind the scenes, working through Mordecai and Esther to preserve and to once again save and deliver his Old Testament people. Then Esther told him to give Mordecai this answer: "Gather all the Jews in Susa and have them fast for me for 3 days. I and my ladies will do the same. Then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. If I perish, I perish." So Mordecai did as Esther had told him. Apparently, in the ancient world, if someone were to just kind of burst into the king's room or chamber and demand an audience without being invited, he or she could immediately be put to death. And because Esther hadn't been summoned, she saw this as a very real potential problem. So she asked Mordecai to have the other Jews fast and mourn with her as they kind of prepare, and then she acknowledges that she will try. 3 days later, Esther put on her royal apparel and waited in the inner court of the king's house by the gate. When the king saw her waiting there, he motioned her to come to him. Then he asked her, "What do you want? Even if you ask for half the kingdom, it will be yours." "If these seem good to you," Esther answered, "I would like you and Haman to come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Tell Haman to hurry so that we can do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman came to Esther's banquet. At the banquet, the king again asked Esther, "What do you want? Even if you ask for half the kingdom, it is yours." But she doesn't come right out and ask for the deliverance of her people. She's being kind of coy, kind of sly, and kind of easing into it. And by doing so, she's essentially setting the trap which will be sprung on old Haman. "If it pleases you," Esther replied, "I would like you both to come to another banquet tomorrow, and then I will make my request." That day Haman left with a joyful heart. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, not standing up or even moving when he went by, Haman became angry with Mordecai. But he didn't say anything. When he got home, he talked to his friends and his wife Zeresh about how rich he was, about his many children, about the proclamation the king had given him, and about the invitation he had received to the banquets that the king had planned for him. "All of that is good for nothing, as long as Mordecai can sit at the king's gate," he said. Then Zeresh and her friends said to him, "Have a gallows 75 feet high be built. Tomorrow we'll talk to the king about hanging Mordecai. Have a good time at the banquet." The idea pleased Haman, so he had the gallows built. Haman is feeling pretty good about himself. He's kind of bragging about how great he is and rich and powerful he is. And there's just that darn Mordecai. So his wife and others hatched this plan to just have Mordecai finally hung and be done with him. But Haman is still feeling pretty good about himself. That night the king could not sleep, so that he had the record books brought so that they could be read to him. The records showed that Mordecai had warned him about the 2 gatekeepers who had planned to kill him. "What has been done to honor Mordecai for doing this?" he asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his servants replied. "Who is in the court?" the king asked. Just then Haman came into the courtyard of the king's house to talk to him about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that had been prepared. The king's servant said, "Haman is standing in the courtyard." "Let him come in," the king said. So Haman came in. "What should be done for a man whom the king really wants to honor?" Ahasuerus asked. Now Haman thought, "To whom would the king give honor more than to myself?" So he answered the king, "Let the royal robes be brought, the ones the king wears, and bring the horse that the king rides. Put the crown on his head, and let the princes ride along with him through the city streets, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for those whom the king wants to honor.' Then the king said to Haman, 'Hurry, take the robes and the horse, like you said, and do this for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at my gate. Don't forget anything you have said.' So Haman did for Mordecai as he had suggested to the king. When Mordecai was returned to the king's gate, Haman hurried to his house in the morning, covering his head. He told Zeresh and his friends everything that had happened. While they were talking, a servant came to take him to Esther's banquet. I'm sure Haman was thinking that things could not get any worse. Here he is so great, and then the one he hated so much, Mordecai, is in fact honored the way he had hoped to be honored. And now it was time to go to Esther's banquet. So the king and Haman came to dine with Esther the queen. While they were drinking wine, the king again asked her, 'What would you like, Queen Esther?' 'If I have found favor in your sight, O king,' Esther answered, 'grant me my life and spare my people. That is my request. We have been sold to be slaughtered and annihilated. If we were to be sold into slavery, I would have kept quiet, because that wouldn't have been worth bothering the king about.' Then King Ahasuerus asked the queen, 'Who is the one who dares to do such a thing? Where is he?' 'The adversary and enemy,' Esther said, 'is this wicked Haman.' Then Haman became afraid. The king angrily got up and went into the palace garden. Haman pleaded with Queen Esther, for he saw that the king was determined to punish him. When the king returned from the garden, Haman had fallen onto the couch where Esther was sitting. 'Is he going to molest the queen right here in my own house?' shouted the enraged king. As soon as he had said this, his servants covered Haman's face. Harbona, one of the court servants, said, 'Look, there's a 75-foot-high gallows by Haman's house that he had made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king.' 'Hang him on it,' the king said. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king gave Mordecai the ring that he had given to Haman. So for a moment, it looked bleak for God's Old Testament people. Haman, who had great power in the kingdom, was setting things up for the Jews to be wiped out, to be annihilated. But then something happens. I don't know, maybe some might be tempted to call it coincidence, or maybe others might say, well, boy, the Jews had a bit of good luck in the story of Esther. Or God was at work, taking steps, putting people in the right places and times to preserve his people. Yes, now outside of Judah, outside of Jerusalem and the area around it, and now all within the heathen nation of Babylon. But still, God is at work, and God is in control. And while he is never mentioned by name in the book of Esther, God does provide. He saves his people, and he makes sure that there will be Jews to carry on the great promises that he had made so much earlier, to Abraham, and to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so, the story of God's people continues.